Hey everyone. In total, Virginia has about 28 roller coasters, and I've been lucky to have been on 22 of them. So, I thought I'd rank my 15 favorites in the state. I do have to note that I haven't been on Loch Ness Monster and Tempesto at Busch Gardens. I also haven't been on some of the small coasters at entertainment centers, but I doubt they would have made the list. With that out of the way, here's my list of my 15 favorite roller coasters in Virginia. So starting with number 15, Racer 75. I've heard people praise this old wooden coaster, but I do not understand the hype. Both sides are forceless, even in the back row, and it's extremely repetitive. Now, I wouldn't mind the hill after hill after hill if they actually gave airtime. I do like the good views of I-305, and the experience is mostly smooth. All of my rides have raced, which makes the coaster more fun, but without racing, this coaster would most likely drop a spot. Moving on to spot 14, Anaconda. This aero looper has some of the worst transitions on a roller coaster. The elements leading up to the mid-course aren't actually too bad, but once you pass the mid-course, well, brace yourself. I'm not sure what Aero was thinking while making this section, but they were not thinking right. The only redeeming part of the second half is the double corkscrews that give fun hang time over the water. Next up is Invader taking 13. Invader is smooth for the most part, but it can get a bit shaky during some of the lateral moments. The best part of the ride for me is the enclosed drop, which is very fun in the back because my stomach always drops. The theming is minimal, but I really like how Invader blends into the Canada section of Busch Gardens, fitting in with the surrounding buildings and landscaping. After that, there's Backlot Stunt Coaster in spot 12. I think this is a great family coaster. The launch doesn't do a lot, but the triple helix following it is extremely intense for a ride that targets all ages. It's smooth, and when the effects are working, a well-themed ride as well. The trains look sick, and while they are a bit tight, the lap bars are still comfortable. I think it's an underrated family coaster that deserves more attention. Moving on to number 11, which is Flight of Fear. In my opinion, Flight of Fear is the best themed attraction at King's Dominion. The alien theming is all done so well and surprises me that this is in a regional theme park. Layout-wise, there's a good launch, and the first 3 inversions are so cool to experience in the dark. The mid-course saps most of the speed from the train, but the turns at the end still manage to be forceful. To sum up this ride, I'd call it a better Space Mountain. And just barely making the cut for the top 10 is Dar Coaster. And I think this ride is super cool, how Intamin was able to fit a full coaster within the old Curse of Dark Castle building. As for the ride experience itself, I think it's a little repetitive. I know it's meant to be a family coaster, but the entire layout is just mostly turns that, for the most part, are forceless. There's one turn after the second launch that's intense, but overall that's it. Speaking of launches, I think the ones on Dar Coaster are surprisingly punchy. I think it's a combination of being indoors and having the lights off, but every time that first launch kicks in, it always catches me off guard. Theming, I think, could have been executed a bit better, but the station and queue are done well. Next up is the first B&M on the list, Dominator, in the 9th spot. The first thing I want to go over with this coaster is the drop. Up until riding Dominator, I've never been on a twisted B&M drop that made my stomach turn. Then the 135-foot tall loop following the drop is amazing. It's definitely one of my favorite inversions of all time. The rest of the layout is standard B and M, but the drop and the loop are incredible standout moments. This coaster also makes a great impression when you walk up to the park entrance. After that is probably the most underrated coaster in the state, Grizzly. I know this ride used to be horribly rough, but after the retrack, it's so much more enjoyable. You do bounce around a bit toward the end, but I think it's fun. Grizzly also has one of the best settings for a coaster. You can't see this ride anywhere in the park, and you can't see anything from this ride. You are completely in the trees. And the drop, oh, the drop is incredible in the back. I wasn't expecting much on my first ride, but you get yanked down that first drop, and my stomach dropped so much. This is currently my favorite wooden coaster I've been on because it's so fun. Moving from underrated to overrated is Apollo's Chariot in spot 7. Opening in 1999, this is B&M's first ever hypercoaster, and I will have to say that it's not perfect. The ride is smooth, fast, and intense, but the airtime is very weak. And with the airtime being the main selling point of the coaster, I was a little disappointed. Some elements that I'd like to point out are the final drop, and the helix turnaround. I was not expecting the turnaround to be as intense as it was, and you really start feeling the positives after a couple of seconds. Apollo's Chariot might not be the best hyper out there, but it still has an amazing setting and those world-class clamshell restraints. And missing the top 5 by 1 spot is Alpengeist, landing in number 6. This ride is intense. Every element before the mid-course is stupidly intense, especially the Cobra roll. The one problem I have with Alpengeist is how hard the mid-course hits. Because the brakes nearly slow the train to a stop, the second half is underwhelming. I think it's fine, but it really hurts the ride's pacing. I think the theming is cool, and I only got a little headbanging on the final 2 inversions, so I'd say Alpengeist is pretty smooth. If the park would just turn the trims off, then this would probably be the second best in the park. Kicking off the top 5 is Verbolten. This multi-launch coaster made by Zera shocked me a lot. Verbolten is marketed as a family coaster, but the forces during the indoor section say otherwise. I think the launches are solid, and the atmosphere when you blast into the Black Forest is awesome. The surprise is also very fun. The coaster is a bit shaky during some parts, but I found that sitting towards the back, it's smoother. This coaster is also the best theme in the park. The station and trains are both done very well, with the trains being my favorite out of any coaster I've ridden. Everything after the Rhine River drop is a bit underwhelming, but everything before is incredible. Now, I might upset some people with this placement, but in my opinion, Griffon is the 4th best coaster in Virginia, a massive 200-foot dive coaster. The reason I have this coaster so high is because Griffon is the only dive coaster I've ever done, so it's still unique to me. But as I ride more coasters and more dive coasters, this will probably drop in my rankings. Anyways, the drop on this thing is amazing. The original over-the-shoulder restraints allow you to get so much airtime, and both drops are a lot of fun. The Immelmans are floaty, and the airtime hill towards the end gives good airtime. Aside from a really cool front entrance sign, Griffon doesn't have much theming. One of my favorite things about Griffon is the trains and how they're 10 across. Looking at the track is also a spectacle because it's massive. Overall, Griffon is a really enjoyable ride, and I could just ride it all day long. Starting my top 3 is Twisted Timbers. This coaster has so much airtime, and you could easily make an argument for this being the most violent coaster in the park. Every hill gives incredibly sharp and powerful airtime that will beat your legs up. This is a top-tier RMC, and it currently sits at my number 3 spot in my overall rankings. The only really complaint I have with this ride is that it has mediocre inversions. I prefer riding in the back, not because the airtime is stronger, but because you get yanked down the first drop. Overall, this is an awesome coaster and a must-do for me when I go to King's Dominion. Next up, placing in second, is Project 305. One word to call this ride: intense. Holy cow, is this intense. Everybody will get a guaranteed gray out on the first turn, and the switchbacks are wild. I've never experienced anything like i305, and I think it's an incredible giga coaster. In my opinion, the best coaster in the state of Virginia is Pantheon. The one thing that Pantheon does better than any coaster at the park is variety. There's hang time, positives, laterals, and airtime, all while being smooth as butter. There are so many great elements that you could all argue as being the standout of the ride. The ejector during the swing launch is the best in the park, and the outer bank is great. The only problem I have with the layout is that I wish there were a couple more elements after the 0G stall. The restraints on this coaster are also extremely open and comfortable. Everything about Pantheon is just good. So those were my 15 favorite roller coasters in the state of Virginia. If you agree or disagree with any of my opinions, feel free to comment down below. I also have reviews for some of these coasters if you're interested in my more detailed thoughts. If you liked this video, then please leave a like and consider subscribing for more theme park content. Thanks for watching to the end, and have a good day.